and welcome to ERP Today Live. I'm Paul Eshelwood. Without doubt, the greatest challenge facing enterprise leaders at the moment, apart from disrupted supply chains and soaring energy costs and rising inflation, is the battle for talent. It's an issue that has gradually been accelerating over the last decade, but now it's a boardroom priority for almost every business. Companies around the world are dealing with a generational challenge to identify, hire, and retain the people that they need to execute in the digital economy. The pandemic has changed how we work and where we work. Younger generations have a new set of priorities, and the dynamic between employer and employee has shifted to create a transient labour landscape. Every company claims to be a great place to work, but how credible are those claims? And what can employers do to improve their talent pipeline, retain key resources, and build a people-first culture that is attractive and performant? Well, to answer these questions and more, hopefully, I'm delighted to be joined by Steve Cadigan and Rachel Jordan for this ERP Today Live session. Steve was LinkedIn's first ever CHRO and is a globally recognized HR advisor to many of the world's leading brands. Steve, welcome to ERP Today Live. It's great to see you.
Great to see you, Paul.
And Rachel Jordan is the Vice President of HCM Product Management at Unit4, a former VP at SuccessFactors and an expert on HR tech. So, Rachel, it's great to see you, and welcome to ERP Today Live as well.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Steve, let me come to you first. I said in my intro that you were the first ever CHRO at LinkedIn. Now, we won't dwell on the past too much, but LinkedIn is a company that has got kind of legendary status within HR circles for developing the gold standard of company culture. Can you just give us a quick overview of your time at LinkedIn and the work that you do today?
Well, probably the best thing I could say on that, Paul, is, Silicon Valley has been a real challenging landscape to recruit within. When you have incredibly successful companies, great brands, and at the time I joined LinkedIn, it wasn't the brand it is today. And I think that experience of having to hire, having to build an organization in an amazingly competitive landscape definitely sharpened my sword. The fact that we were a recruiting company sort of meant it was our birthright to be really good at recruiting. And, at the end of the day, one of the lessons that we took away was you're not going to be able to outpay your competitors. You're not going to be able to outbenefit your competitors. What you can do, what you can win is on something that costs nothing but commitment, and that is on culture. And really, what I would like to say, we came to the table thinking culture was going to be our competitive advantage. We didn't. It was something we discovered when we tried everything. And many organizations today that have never faced the landscape of competition for talent that they're facing, I think are going to soon come to realize the best way to play this in a very competitive world is to build a place where great people want to be.
I guess those dynamics from Silicon Valley, maybe 10, 15 years ago, are very similar to the dynamics that we're starting to see now in the digital economy, where you've got lots of very big and successful brands all competing over a very small pool of digitally enabled resources.
Exactly. And when I look at industries like healthcare, industries like hospitality, they've never seen the challenge to be able to recruit. They've always had an available, abundant supply of people willing to apply, willing to join their firm. And now the pandemic, as you mentioned in your introduction, has dramatically shifted everyone's outlook on where they want to work, what they want to do. And this is a scary moment for organizations that have never faced this before.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Thanks, Steve. Rachel, let me come to you for a quick intro. You've got a decade's worth of experience working with HR teams, firstly with SuccessFactors, one of the defining HR tech companies around, and now with Unit4, a tech vendor with a really strong affinity for people-centric businesses. Can you just tell our viewers a bit about your role and the type of companies that you work with?
Sure. I've in my past and up to the present, I've worked with companies of all shapes and sizes in every industry. And, everything that Steve just mentioned really resonates now. We're seeing hiring challenges and recruiting challenges really in every single industry, in all different kinds of workers, all kinds of roles. It's really interesting. There's definitely a staffing shortage, and it's hitting everybody. Mm-hmm. And so all these companies are all examining what can we do differently? How do we change? And that's a hard thing to do. I think with recruiting, it's easy to say, let's attack this from a cultural perspective. Let's be a great place to work. But what does that mean?
Sure.
How do you figure out what's important to your employees? How do you make yourselves competitive and offer something that nobody else offers? And so I think that's what everyone's challenged with right now, digging into the culture they have, because the other side of recruiting, of course, is retention. And I not only want to draw people in, I want to show them why they want to stay here.
Sure.
So.
Steve, let's just see if we can try and get a bit of a definition around this idea of company culture, because as you both mentioned it, and as Rachel quite rightly said, what does that actually mean? Every time I speak to a business leader, they talk about their culture. They all say they're a great place to work, but it's very difficult to kind of define exactly what is company culture and what is a great company culture.
Yeah. Oh, so you want me to answer that one?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. It is really squishy. It's an organic, being. And the thing that's really interesting about culture is that it's never static. Humans are never static. We're always changing. And it's important that culture does change over time. But if I were to sort of distill it down to what it means to me, it's the environment, it's the values, it's the belief systems, the shared belief systems that really govern the environment where you do your work. And that could mean different things. It could sort of drive different behaviors in different organizations. For example, there is no one right culture. There are dimensions of culture, which I would say would be recommended, but there is no right or wrong culture here. And I've seen two companies that are competitors in the same size, the same age, have dramatically different cultures because of who people are. And this is one of the things I find really interesting living here in Silicon Valley is there are busloads of Silicon Valley tourists coming here to benchmark the Googles, the Facebooks, the LinkedIns, the Twitters of the world. And I find it interesting because it's good to see what those companies are doing, but what they're doing, what their cultures are, may not suit you. You're not in that industry. You're not founded by those people. So I think I think we all generally recognize this is important, but what that definition is kind of up to you as an organization, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point to make, actually, because there isn't just one gold standard that almost like if you think about that in the tech world, you go back to standard and we're all trying to standardize our processes. Culture is different to that, and that very much impact is dependent on the kind of industry, the size of the company, the personalities involved. There are all those different ingredients that can kind of come together, and you can have completely different companies, but they both got great cultures. And I guess the opposite could also apply.
I think that's interesting too. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, Rachel.
I was just going to quickly add in there, Rachel, sorry, is that, I do a lot of work with entrepreneurs and talking about culture. And they say, well, what should we do? Think about our culture. I said, well, you already have a culture. And they said, well, what do you mean? I said, you've already established how you're dressing, what time you show up, how you communicate, what information you share, how you've designed your work environment, where people are working. And so there's a lot of culture that develops just out of, interaction. Sure. And so there's intentional culture, and then there's just culture of how things work. And it's important to be aware of those, right?
Sure. Rachel, go ahead, jump in.
Sure. I was just going to say, when we talk about recruiting, I always think it's interesting too, to just examine the way that you describe your own company, the language that you use. What's the tone in a job posting on your website? Are you quirky? Are you formal? Are you, I think you can get a lot about the personality of a company, and that personality generally reflects the culture. And I 100% agree. There is not a one size fits all answer here. But I think it's interesting for people to look at when you read a job posting, do you feel it reflects your personality, your company's personality? That's a big part of it. People talk a lot about inclusiveness and belonging. Some companies really embrace socialization. Others really embrace remote work and working individually. So it's fascinating how they're very different. But these things, this is what you have to figure out by taking the pulse of your employees. What are their values? What's important to them? And what stands out when you really listen and dig into what they're telling you? What does that say about your culture? And is it the culture that you want? I think that's the other thing.
do you think that there is a danger that when companies try and design their culture, and I know, Steve, back to your original point, you said you can't really do that. It's kind of, it happens. It happens as a consequence of all these different ingredients, but there is such a sharp focus on ESG and society and inclusiveness that you could almost imagine a HR team or HR sitting there thinking, right, what are the things that we need in our culture? We'll kind of draw up a list, and that doesn't create the culture. That just kind of creates the blueprint for what we'd like it to be. Actually making it the culture is something very different. Do you think there's a danger that it's hard for candidates maybe to identify where the real culture is when everybody's trying to project the same kind of outward image now?
Yeah, Paul, outstanding insight and question. There's the culture that captures who you are, and then there's always the aspirational culture. Who do we want to be? The biggest trap that I see many leaders and organizations fall into, out of good intentions, is that they overprescribe the culture and they set their leaders up to a standard which is not realizable. And so the one surefire way to destroy your culture is to say it's one thing and have your leaders behave differently. And I've seen that happen so many times. And honestly, Paul, and I'm sure Rachel's experienced this too, I've had to walk into so many executive meetings where there is real reticence and resistance to doing anything around culture because these leaders have been burned, or they've been in organizations where the company had posters and badges and definitions all over the place, but the executives were behaving differently. And they felt almost trapped or set up, and this is really, it's a fine line and it's really hard. The goals of having a great culture are really, those are worthy. But the challenge is overprescribing sometimes creates a dynamic that I think is an unintended consequence of people are going to say, well, I heard you say that, but that's not how you behave. Oh, we're supposed to be, kind and respectful. Well, I saw how you treated those employees in that meeting. That wasn't kind and respectful. This whole thing is a house of cards. You see what I'm saying?
Sure.
Yeah.
Rachel,
I think the other thing I would add to that, another good example that definitely applies, again, kind of taking it back to recruiting as well, is the idea of work-life balance. We hear work-life balance, and that's a big part of culture that people are looking for now. I think especially with the pandemic and having to suddenly balance things you were really unaccustomed to having to balance before when it came to your personal life and work, with so many people working from home. Work-life balance is something everybody claims to have. But that's, again, one that you can describe it, but were there cultural changes that were made that actually matched up, that your employees actually have work-life balance? So when you interview and you speak with different employees, it's always interesting to compare what you're hearing and what you're gathering about their day-to-day to say, well, what changes did they make that allowed them to maintain a healthy balance? So I think that's another one it's kind of an obvious one, but it's the one we see the most when we talk about culture.
Rachel, I think that's a really good point, and it's what I have an optic into the industry here, so I see all the different tech vendors and all the big consultancies, and I get to see how their human capital strategies work, and they all talk about a work-life balance being very, very important. And I think the thing that I struggle with is that what for some, what that means is they, once every quarter they get a day off to go to the park and have tea in the park. And then the rest of the time, because they've had that benefit and because they've done something really social, they're expected to be on 18 hours a day whenever the work is. I'm not sure how much work-life balance I actually see in our own industry. I think the demands that are being placed on people are increasing rather than decreasing. And with everybody working from home now, there isn't that off button. It's almost expected that, morning, noon or night, if you're needed for something, you're there to deliver it. And I think that's one thing that our industry, but all industries really need to think about with the change in the physical location of where people work. I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Paul, one of the things, you're going to get me on a little bit of a rant here, and I was trying to hold back, but
no, don't hold back.
When we're talking about culture and we're talking about the value of culture, that's all embedded in, we believe that to win, we want to have the best people and the best environment to produce the best outcomes for our people. And when it comes to, talent systems, and this is the business that Unit4 is in, what I always find interesting is when I ask executives, do you believe people are number one? They go, oh yeah. I said, so then why is the least invested system in your organization The talent system. Why did you let the CFO buy it? Why didn't you let the head of HR buy it? Why are the the most underperforming systems, the least utilized, are your talent systems? Why is that? Why did you pay more for accounting and sales client management systems? And they don't have a good answer to that one. And this is why I love the partnership with Unit4. And what they're doing is they're putting that first. And let's build around that. Let's look to unlock the magic. So that to me is another, discontinuity, if you will, when organizations say, "Oh yeah, we're all about the people first." Okay, so then, why did you have the CFO buy some add-on feature to some other, accounting system that has HR stuff in it? It's just wrong. It's really wrong. And this is, a moment I think people have got to sort of say, let's put this in the priority it deserves, right?
Rachel, you must have a great insight into this. I mean, when you go and see a customer, do you think that there is less investment into people management systems, HR systems, than there should be? And do you think that is starting to change, or do you still think there's a real lag? Because
I was just going to say it's changing.
When I look at digital transformation, it all goes into the areas that Steve's mentioned. How can we make our sales process more performant? How can we automate invoicing or payments? And that the people bit often is left behind. What's your experience of that?
I think the tide has definitely turned. It's turning, and people are realizing they need to invest in people and development and talent more. Even in our industry in HCM, up until the past few years, the focus was still very much on automation. And how do we, just be more efficient at doing our jobs and getting things done? There's still that attitude of get it done. But I think recently they've realized, again, with an eye on both retention and organizational agility are big buzzwords. We're looking at how do we actually develop people? How do we keep them in-house by offering them new opportunities to learn and reskill? Let them make a career shift without leaving the company. How do we provide better internal mobility? All of that comes down to a talent system. Sure. And the interesting thing when you talk to these companies, though, especially if your buyer really is more on the IT side rather than the HR side, is that they forget that an HCM system, a talent and learning and development system, it's not just something that's turnkey where you just flip a switch with a set of tools and you're done. Magically, you suddenly have internal development and you have career planning. It actually takes, again, investment, really evaluating your processes and how you work, and also instilling that culture of being willing to work with your employees on careers and saying, what is best for you? And being willing to sometimes let people go internally and say, you know what, you would be better fit in another department, or a better role waits for you, and be willing to help that person and let them leave. So there's cultural aspects, there's top-down aspects of this, that it needs support across the company in every dimension. You don't just buy a system, turn it on, and magic happens. So.
Thanks, Rach. I guess there's a couple of points I'd like to come back on there. I mean, the whole intersection point between people and technology is one that, again, I haven't really got a very clear definition in my mind about how to explain that. And I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask you to do it either. But, some companies think, as you said, I'm going to buy a talent management solution, I'll turn it on, and then suddenly I've got a great HR function, or I've got a people-centric business. I don't think that's the case, but I also think that possibly HR tech can only take you so far. You need the HR tech is the enabler. You need the culture behind it. So that's one point. And the second point is, and it's Steve, this was something that we spoke about off mic actually, about leads very nicely into what Rachel has just said then about investing in development. Because sometimes you'll invest in the development of your people and they'll stay, and they may move to a new role, but they'll stay with the organization. But possibly you may invest in them and then they leave. And I'm wondering whether that is a barrier to investment in both people and people technology, for the fear that you might bring somebody in, you might train them, give them all this learning and development, and then they leave for a different organization. What's your view on that, Steve?
This is a question that comes up all the time, and I have a very simple answer to this one. They're going to leave anyway. And if you're only caring about your people when they work for you, you're really missing a huge opportunity. In a more fluid world of work, which you described and outlined really well at the outset, people are going to leave. That means you're going to have more alumni than you've ever had. The great systems and tools out there are going to keep connected with those people and keep that alumni community a valuable part, a positive force in your ecosystem. So the more you develop them, maybe the more people they'll refer to you when they leave, maybe the more deals they'll send your way, maybe they'll be a positive force. One company of the 6 major firms I've worked with in my career somewhat regularly reaches out to me, just one. And most people, when I ask, hey, do you communicate with your alumni regularly? They start looking at their shoes. And I said, well, you just told me you have higher turnover than you've ever had. Why? And it means you have more alumni. Why are you just letting that atrophy? It needs to be something that's really, really important. So, my thinking on that one, it harks back to when we launched LinkedIn and we would go visit clients and they would say, well, why would we deploy LinkedIn? It's just going to allow our employees to go search for another job. I'll say they're going to do it anyway. You have to lean in, and it does feel uncomfortable, but it is absolutely the right thing to do. Play to benefit your people for their entire career journey, not just when they work for you.
That's a big leap, isn't it? For some employees, you think about hiring somebody and you're developing them over the life cycle of their personal career rather than their time with you. But if you get the engagement right, and maybe some of the alumni recruitment or community tools, and you make them kind of an ambassador for your business, there'll be a whole load of trickle down benefits for that investment, maybe further down the line.
Correct. It's one of those, it's like air. You need to do it. So let me give you another example, which is another one of me getting on my soapbox, which is just a discontinuity I don't understand. I go into every organization today and say, what's your biggest problem? Can't hire the people and we can't keep the people. And I said, well, let me ask you, before we start talking about the hiring problem, how aware are you of all the skills of the people that you have currently? I say, oh, not so good. I said, so how can you tell me you have a hiring problem? What you really probably have is a skills awareness problem. Maybe you need to sort that out first, because I promise you, there are people here that can do jobs that are open right now that you're just not aware of. And that's another, self-inflicted wound, food falling on the floor moment, where with the right systems, and as Rachel says, and the right application and investment in using them properly, you stand to immeasurably, I think, improve your fear of what's not working right now. And that's skill awareness. When people say I have a recruiting problem, say, no, you have a creativity problem. You're not thinking about this the right way.
Sure. Okay, Steve, thank you. Rachel, do you want to come back on that and the kind of the utilization of HR tech to fill some of those gaps? Because whether it's HR tech, whether it's finance, or whether it's procurement, one of the big things that I see in most implementations is the underutilization of the technology. So, a company buys a new system and then they use 2 or 3% of the functionality of it. Maybe some of that additional functionality could then tap into some of the things that Steve was just talking there about skills awareness and skills matching within other businesses. What do you see in terms of HR tech and the way that it's being used at the moment? Do you think that it is underutilized once it's been bought by a customer?
I do. It actually is. I think a lot of people look at tool sets and they look at the surface application of it. I'm going to send a survey out. I'm going to get my results, and I feel like I know what's going on in the month that I sent it out. I'm going to do performance reviews, and I feel like I've used my tool properly. I did my reviews for the year. But what I think, they look at the big picture, what each of these tools is doing is building up a huge amount of data. And everything really should come down to data. If you use all the tools properly, and then you take a creative look at the data you've amassed, you would see, with all of the role descriptions you have, you can start to get at the skills you have associated with those roles. If you look into your engagement surveys and get a feel for maybe trends, you can look at trends in the company and sentiment. With performance reviews, you can also do things that apply to retention. You can look for trending with why people might be leaving. You can start to forecast and predict. Mm-hmm. It's really, really interesting. But if you just use the different tool sets with a look at the now, I think you miss out on a lot of opportunity. So it's really, Data, data, data. I think everything comes down to data in the end.
I
And companies have more of it than they realize. They just need to think about how to use it.
I guess in one way, the idea of data and HR and people is slightly counterintuitive, because when you're thinking about an organization and we're talking about people and culture, you want to make that very personal. But then actually what we're saying is that you can still do that, but you can use the data, which is a very impersonal kind of commodity almost, to actually then get the insights that you'll need to make people's jobs more interesting, to deploy them better, to predict when they might be unhappy, all those kind of things. Steve, what's your view on the use of HR data as a tool, and what do you see with the companies that you work with? Do you think that they're maximizing the data they've got, or do you think there's more that can be done?
I think there's an awareness that they know more can be done. I mean, think about it. I mean, talent analytics as a profession is less than 10 years old, maybe 6, 7. And it's really something that we're starting to learn how to mine. And I'm excited about the future. And I think that puts pressure, on Rachel and her team. How can we ease the pathway to insights so people can really leverage them, right? And do it in a gamified way so that, I can get that, I want to get more. I remember about, 12 years ago at LinkedIn, we had a turnover issue just like everyone. And so we had a meeting with my whole HR team, like, hey, we got to solve this. Like, who's leaving and why? And what insights can we find? And someone on the benefits team said, hey, I just looked at all the people that left, and there's a correlation here between some of the people who left and first-time parents. And our systems weren't designed to sort of surface an insight like that. But when we thought about it, we said, wow, when you're a first-time parent, your whole life values takes a real turn, where you want to be, how you want to spend your time. And that was just an accidental moment of talent analytics showing up because we're trying to solve a problem. And I think, packaging our systems in a way that we can find those insights and leverage them and have more stories where people are using those to really inform better systems is going to deliver a better culture. It's going to deliver better performance. And I think that's where we are. I think we're at still the discovery phase, Paul, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Steve, going back to your time at LinkedIn, you said that you kind of discovered culture by accident in a way. Well, there will be hundreds, if not thousands, of business leaders out there kind of grappling with the same challenges, albeit in a slightly different time frame with a slightly different set of challenges in front of them. What if you had to give them like 2 or 3 key learnings from your time at LinkedIn that play just as equally now? What would you say to them in terms of trying to start to mold both your culture and your talent strategies so that they're fit for work today?
I think the one question we stumbled upon when we had so many offer declines, so many, people that were choosing someone else. And in Silicon Valley, you don't hire a software engineer that doesn't have 5 other offers. We sat around and we asked a question, which I encourage everyone to do, because this question will unlock so many helpful domains, especially around your culture. Ask the question, why does anyone want to work here? When you do that, you're going to get closer to who you are, what you're about, what the right profile of person is that's going to thrive in this environment, because you're not going to be right for everyone. And that's hard for everyone thinks, we're beautiful, we're sexy, everyone should want to date us. But that's not true. And once you get comfortable with that, then you say, well, who is our ideal fit? And what environment do we optimize for? That's probably the best advice that I can give. I mean, we tried everything with the recruiting problem, sourcing parties, referral bonuses, bringing in, executive, fancy speakers to try to draw in talent for the day, and, tech talks, and no good results. And in competition inside the company, department to department, on who's got the best referral rate. What changed was when we decided, and this is a choice every organization has to make, we decided we're going to be the best place anyone's ever worked. We can't outpay, we can't outbenefit, we can't outperk, we can't outwork environment, but we can make the day-to-day the most engaging experience that our employees have ever had. And by the way, we're LinkedIn. It should be our birthright. Like, we should own that. And when we got that chemistry between market fit and internal fit, that really unlocks magic. So I would strongly recommend, if you're struggling with this, like start with, why does anyone want to work here? And that will lead you on a good path.
Rachel, let me come to you for the final word. That was excellent advice, Steve. But underpinning all of those strategies and ideals has to be the right technology that can deliver the right data to get the right insights. What would you say to business leaders out there who maybe have already, because most have invested in some kind of HR tech, but probably aren't using it to its fullest potential? Where should they start, and what are the things you think they should think about the most?
I think that the number one thing is to understand where you want to be. What are the specific changes that you're looking for, specific goals you want to achieve? When you set out to have a quantifiable, whether it's a number or again, that goal, I think then you can step back to say, how do I measure that? And then what is my benchmark right now? So I can start to figure out how I get there, the right tools, and you have an idea of how to measure success at the end. And that sounds really basic, but a lot of people skip that step. So they move forward with a plan and then they say, great, is it working? And it's very hard to measure that when you can't retroactively go back and benchmark and figure out, well, how do I measure that it's working? But if you start off with that idea of where you want to be and you figure out how you're going to measure it later, you'll put the right tools in place and you will do the right things in the right sequence.
Rachel,
again, it sounds really basic, but.
Well, that's excellent advice. And I sincerely hope that that many of you take note of some of these lessons, because the battle for talent is certainly fierce at the moment. It doesn't matter which industry you're in. It's a very buoyant jobs market, and candidates kind of are choosing where they want to work at the moment. And as Steve has rightly said, many of you out there will not be able to buy talent simply by paying more money or bonusing or compensating. It's really about having all those ingredients so that people feel valued and they feel that their jobs are fulfilling and worthwhile. Anyway, that's about all we've got time for on this session of ERP Today Live. Hope to see you all again soon. But for now, thank you very much to Steve Cadigan. Great to see you, Steve.
Thanks for having me.
And Rachel Jordan, it was a pleasure. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.